I'm Elise Navarro, 35, the eldest daughter and technically the executor of my mother's estate. But on that day, no one looked at me like I mattered. We were all gathered in the hospital's palliative wing, room 409A, at the edge of St. Clair's. The walls were soft green, like someone thought color would trick you into forgetting why you were there. My mother, Vivienne Navarro, lay on the bed propped up by two pillows, frail, papery, her hair flattened into a silver crown. Machines beeped with the clinical indifference of passing time. Someone had wheeled in a floral arrangement that reeked of lilies. They said she had hours, maybe less. My sister Clarissa wore all white, like she was auditioning for sainthood, holding Mom's hand and whispering something that made her cry. My brother Lucas stood near the foot of the bed, nodding solemnly, gripping the edge of the IV pole like it might pull him upright. Everyone else cousins, church friends. The hospice chaplain was gathered in a semicircle, eyes glassy, voices low. I stood off to the side, arms crossed, clutching a folder beneath my coat. No one asked why I had it. No one looked. A nurse brushed past me. "Excuse me," she murmured without eye contact, guiding another chair in for Clarissa's husband. I cleared my throat. "There's something Mom wanted me to." Clarissa didn't even look up. "Not now, Elise. Just don't." Lucas shot me a glance, half apology, half warning. "She's barely conscious," Clarissa added. "Don't start drama." I stood there for a moment too long, feeling heat crawl up my chest. I looked down at my hands gripping the envelope. My mother's signature was still fresh on it, and the ink hadn't even dried on the second copy the lawyer notarized yesterday. If you've ever stood in a room full of family and felt like furniture, drop a comment, or just tell me where you're watching from. And hey, if silence ever made you feel erased, hit like or subscribe. You're not the only one. Then the door creaked. It wasn't the nurse. It wasn't the chaplain. It was attorney Raymond Todd, Mom's estate lawyer, navy pinstripe, silver cufflinks. The man looked like a will walked into the room. "Sorry to intrude," he said, glancing around the gathered faces. But Mrs. Navarro insisted I be here before she passed. She asked for it to be read aloud with all her children present. Clarissa's face paled. Read what he held up, the original envelope. Her revised will. The air cracked. Someone gasped. A chair creaked. I stepped forward, quietly this time, and opened my folder to match his. And that's when they turned to look at me. Really look. Clarissa's hand fell from Mom's. Lucas straightened like he was seeing me for the first time in years. The room went silent, and I felt the shift. You'd think I'd have felt triumphant, or at least smug. But in that moment, facing the stunned silence of a room that had, until seconds ago, treated me like wallpaper, I just felt hollow. Mr. Todd walked to the foot of Mom's bed, giving her a soft, deferential nod. Her eyes flickered open for the briefest second. She didn't speak, but her lips moved. It looked like thank you. Then he turned to us. Vivienne Navarro's final will and testament, updated June 14th, witnessed and signed by all required parties. In accordance with her request, it will be read now. Clarissa looked like she wanted to object, mouth half open, eyes darting toward Lucas, then back to Mom. But there was no protest. Not yet. Raymond Todd cleared his throat, pulled out a paper with steady hands, and began. "To my beloved children, Elise Navarro, Clarissa Navarro Mendoza, and Lucas Navarro, I offer my final words and wishes. Please know this revision was made not in anger or favoritism, but in clarity, and with love." The whole room tensed. To Clarissa, my daughter who always brought flowers, I leave the blue china set and my personal journals. You were the keeper of my spirit, even when I did not understand your choices." Clarissa's expression didn't move, but her knuckles went white around the chair's arms. "To Lucas, my son. I leave the vintage guitar, the one your father gave me before you were born. I always knew music ran deeper in you than any of us could hear." Lucas exhaled slowly. No smile, just a long look down at the tiles. "And to Elise, my firstborn, I leave my house, the savings account, the land in Maine, and full executor rights. You carried the weight no one saw. I saw. And I'm sorry it took me this long to say it." Silence. Pure, hard silence. The kind that makes walls feel like they're leaning in. I didn't move. I didn't say thank you. I just stared at the paper. I had read it a dozen times in the lawyer's office, but somehow, hearing it aloud, in front of them of her, it scraped something open. The rest of the reading passed in a blur. Details about donations, furniture, family heirlooms, but everything else faded. It was the house, the land, the bank account. That was what echoed. Clarissa finally spoke. "This is a joke." Raymond looked up. "I assure you it's not. It's legally binding. The paperwork is solid. We filed a copy with probate this morning, per her request." She was barely conscious when she signed anything. Clarissa snapped. She was dying. She didn't know what she was doing. She was fully alert during the meeting. Raymond replied, calm and rehearsed. "I have video, witnesses, a hospital notary. Everything is documented." Clarissa turned to me. "So this is what you've been doing behind our backs, sneaking around, manipulating a dying woman." My voice was quiet, but sharp. She called me. I didn't ask her to change anything. I just answered. Lucas spoke up. "Finally. Maybe we should talk somewhere else. Not in front of her." He gestured toward Mom, who had slipped back into that shallow breathing pattern. The chaplain stepped forward too. "Why don't we all give Vivienne a little peace now?" But the room had already changed. Aunt Margaret grabbed her purse and murmured something to her husband before leaving. One of the cousins followed. The energy had curdled, and no amount of prayer or politeness would uncurdle it. Eventually, it was just the three of us. Me, Clarissa, and Lucas, standing at different points around the room like we were guarding a shrine we didn't believe in anymore. Clarissa folded her arms. "You think money fixes everything, don't you?" I looked at her. "No, I think silence breaks everything." Lucas cleared his throat. "Why didn't you say anything before today?" I looked down. "Because the last time I tried to tell you something serious, you both laughed. Remember when Mom fell in the kitchen, I said she needed a nurse. You said I was overreacting." Neither of them spoke. "I've been handling the bills for months," I added. "She gave me power of attorney in February. She didn't want you to know until the end because she knew how we'd react." Clarissa cut in. "Because she was afraid of you," I said softly. That landed like a slap. Clarissa looked away. Lucas sat down on the edge of the radiator. "This isn't about money. It's about control." "No," I said. "It's about the fact that I was here. Every week. While you were planning baby showers and beach trips. I was the one who took her to chemo. I'm not better than you. I'm just present." Clarissa's voice cracked. "You always thought you were Mom's favorite." "I didn't," I said. "But I knew I wasn't yours." That one hung in the air. Years of quiet jabs, of being the serious one, the cold one, the career girl who forgot what family means. All those things floated between us now, visible for the first time. Lucas looked up at the ceiling like it might rescue him. "So what happens now?" I shrugged. "I keep doing what I promised her. I manage the estate. I pay off the debts. I bury her with dignity. You're both welcome to help. Or not." Clarissa's eyes softened for the first time. She really chose you. I nodded. She did. In the end. A long pause. Then Clarissa turned back toward Mom, brushing a hair from her forehead. She always said you reminded her of Grandma. She murmured. Strong, stubborn, too proud to ask for help. I smiled faintly. Maybe. Or maybe I just got tired of waiting to be invited. Lucas stood. Do you think she's at peace now? I looked at Mom's chest, rising and falling like a tide slowly running out of shore. I don't know, I said, but I think she finally spoke the truth. Lucas nodded slowly. Clarissa didn't move. I reached into my bag and placed a folded letter at the foot of Mom's bed. Not the will. Just a note. Something private. Something I had written the night before, unsure if I'd ever be brave enough to leave it. And then I stepped back. Whatever came next. Lawyers, probate court, fights over plates and paintings, I was ready. Because the silence was broken, and that was the only thing I really wanted. The next morning, I came back alone. The sun hadn't yet reached the windows of room 409A, but I could see its gray promise stretching along the hallway walls. The scent of rubbing alcohol clung to the air like something permanent. The nurse at the station smiled at me with that sad, professional recognition you only get in hospitals, where time passes in heartbeats instead of hours. She had a calm night, the nurse said softly. No distress. She's still breathing steady. I nodded. Thank you. The room was quieter without the crowd, without Clarissa's perfume or Lucas's nervous pacing. It was just me, my mother, and the quiet hum of machinery. I sat beside her, fingers folded, watching her mouth twitch every now and then, as though she were mumbling secrets in sleep. Her left hand, thin and veined, was warm when I held it. Mom, I whispered, I hope you meant it. It wasn't doubt, it was grief, suspended in disbelief. I pulled the will out again, not because I needed to read it, but because it felt like a shield. The lines were too clean, too definitive for the mess in my chest. I'd spent years telling myself I didn't care if she saw me or not. I buried myself in my job, my apartment, my neat life with clean counters and unopened birthday cards from my siblings. But when she chose me, really chose me, it felt less like victory, and more like a late apology I didn't know how to hold. By noon, she was gone. The nurse came in, pressed her fingers gently to my mother's wrist, and nodded with a kind of reverent finality. I'll give you a moment, she said. I stayed in that room with her body for over an hour. I talked to her about the roses blooming in the backyard she never saw this year, about the birds that used to eat from her windowsill, about the lemon cake she made every Sunday when I was a kid, even when she was too tired. I told her I forgave her, even though part of me hadn't decided if I did, and when I stood up, I kissed her forehead, still warm, and whispered, no more secrets. Back in the hallway, the wait began. The funeral arrangements, the calls, the condolences, the endless sympathy texts from numbers I didn't recognize. Each one landed like a pebble in my pocket, slowly dragging me down. Clarissa didn't speak to me for 3 days. Lucas sent a single message. She's gone. Do what you have to do. So I did. I met with Mr. Todd again, this time in a smaller office filled with paperwork and too much artificial light. I signed documents, submitted death certificates, opened accounts, closed others. I gave instructions for the obituary, wrote the eulogy myself because no one else volunteered. The memorial was held at St. Brigid's Chapel. It was the same church where Mom used to volunteer, where she had taught Sunday school and arranged altar flowers and told children to stop fidgeting. The pews were full. Some people I didn't know hugged me like we were family. Others gave me polite nods. too unsure of the new pecking order to approach. Clarissa arrived just before the service, dressed in charcoal, with a lace veil that looked like it belonged in a movie. She sat in the second row, flanked by her husband and mother-in-law, who looked at me with an expression that hovered somewhere between pity and disdain. Lucas stood in the back, near the door, like he was ready to leave at a moment's notice. When the priest called me forward to speak, I felt my throat close. I didn't want to read what I had written. Instead, I folded the paper and slipped it back in my pocket. Then I looked out at the rows of people and said, "My mother was not easy." A few chuckles, a few tight smiles, but she was honest when she allowed herself to be. And in the last few months of her life, I saw a version of her I'd never known. She asked hard questions, she admitted fears, and for the first time, she stopped trying to be the strongest person in the room. I looked at Clarissa, who didn't blink. Mom told me she was proud of all of us, but she also said something else, that the things left unsaid in a family do the most damage. So I want to say some of them now. Silence. Clarissa. Lucas. You took care of her in your own ways. Maybe not the ways she asked for, but the ways you knew how. And I see that now. I turned back to the crowd. She loved all of us. Differently. Imperfectly. But truly. And I hope, someday, we can do the same for each other. I stepped down before my voice could shake too much. After the service, people filtered out into the courtyard. Sunlight dappled the cobblestones. Someone handed me a cup of weak lemonade. Clarissa approached. She stood there for a moment, looking at the stone planter next to me like it might answer for what had happened. Then she said, "She always told me I'd be the one to handle her funeral." "I know," I said. She looked at me. "But you did it well. Better than I would have." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. Then she added, "I still don't think the will was fair." I met her eyes. Maybe it wasn't. She looked surprised by that. "I didn't ask for any of it," I said, "but I'm not giving it back." Clarissa gave a small, sad smile. "No, I wouldn't either." Lucas joined us a minute later, hands in his pockets. "I kept thinking I'd feel something more," he said, "like grief or closure or I don't know, but I just feel tired. I think that's what closure actually is." I said, "Just being too tired to fight anymore." We stood there, the three of us, siblings and strangers, orbiting the space our mother used to fill. For the first time in years, no one raised their voice. No one walked away. Later that night, I walked through Mom's house alone. The key turned easily in the lock. The smell was still hers, lavender and old paper. I stepped into the living room and sat on the couch, the same one she used to fall asleep on while watching British detective shows. I pulled out a box I had stashed beneath the coffee table. Letters, receipts, a photograph of me and her at my 5th grade science fair. She looked tired in the photo. I looked proud. And suddenly, I didn't feel like an heir. I felt like a daughter again. I held the photo against my chest, leaned back, and let the silence come in, not the kind that shuts you out, but the kind that finally lets you breathe. The following weeks unraveled like old yarn, slow, tangled, and full of knots no one warned me about. Probate moved quickly thanks to Mr. Todd's preparation, but everything else was slow. Sorting through a parent's house is like reading their diary one drawer at a time. I found things I wasn't ready to find. Letters she never sent. Receipts from decades ago she thought were important. Half-knitted scarves with no matching yarn. It was as if she had tried to leave a trail, but forgot where it was going. I spent my weekends there, wearing the same faded hoodie and jeans, putting labels on boxes like it was a ritual. Donate. Keep. Clarissa. Trash. That last one hurt every time. It felt like I was throwing away pieces of her. But how many chipped teacups does grief require? One Saturday, I pulled open the lowest drawer of her old writing desk. Inside was a folder I hadn't seen before, thin, pale blue, almost hidden beneath a stack of prayer cards. It wasn't labeled. I sat cross-legged on the floor and opened it slowly. Inside were letters, not from her to her, handwritten, yellowed with age. They were from my father. I hadn't seen his handwriting in over 20 years. He died when I was 14. An aneurysm, sudden and swift. He collapsed in the kitchen while making tea. I remembered the cup still sitting on the stove when I came home from school. These letters were dated from the years before I was born. Some were playful, romantic even. Others were heavy, full of guilt and apologies. But one stood out, an envelope with my name on it, in his handwriting. I didn't breathe as I opened it. It wasn't long, just a single page, written when my mother was pregnant with me. Elise, if you're reading this, then maybe I'm gone, or maybe you're just old enough to find it. Either way, I want you to know something. You were wanted. More than anything, I didn't get to meet you yet. But I already know you'll be strong like your mother. Maybe too strong. But I hope you learn softness. Too. I hope you never feel like you had to earn love. You don't. Just being you is enough. Take care of her if I'm not around. She's not easy, but she loves deep. And I know she'll need you more than she'll say. Love. Dad, I stared at the letter until my hands started trembling. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there in that dusty sunbeam, holding the paper like it might disappear. It didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the years I spent wondering why she pulled away after he died. Why I always felt like I was too much, or not enough. But it cracked something open. She wasn't trying to replace him. She was surviving him. That night, I scanned the letter and saved a copy in my cloud drive. Then I folded the original gently and tucked it into a wooden box I kept in my apartment. Alongside it, I added the family photo from the science fair and a small note that said, "Found you." The house itself became quieter the more I emptied it. Fewer voices in the walls, fewer secrets in the shelves. But one room I hadn't touched yet, her bedroom. I saved it for last. The following Saturday, I opened the door with hesitation. Everything was still exactly as she left it. The quilt pulled tight across the bed, the perfume bottle on the vanity, the framed photo of Clarissa's wedding on the dresser. My photo was there too, just smaller, almost tucked behind a lamp. I sat on the edge of her bed and waited for the sadness to hit like a wave. It didn't. It came like a fog. Slow, heavy, blurring the edges of everything. I opened her closet and found what I was dreading: her dresses, her shoes, her old scarves still smelling faintly of lavender and starch. On the top shelf, above the shoeboxes, was another envelope. I had grown used to them by now, like breadcrumbs she had left behind on purpose. This one was addressed to all three. I called Lucas and Clarissa. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when we met at the house. I set up 3 chairs around the dining room table. Clarissa brought coffee. Lucas brought nothing, but at least he showed up. "I found something," I said simply. "It's from Mom. For all of us." Clarissa's eyes were cautious. "Another will—" "No, just a letter." I passed it across the table. Clarissa took it, read the first few lines, and handed it to Lucas without a word. He read it out loud. "My children, if you're reading this, I'm probably already gone. I didn't write this as a legal document. I wrote it as a mother who got more things wrong than she wanted to admit. I loved you, all of you, but I didn't always show it the right way. I was hardest on Elise because I saw too much of myself in her. I leaned on her when I should have protected her. I leaned on Clarissa to be graceful, to keep the family from cracking. I leaned on Lucas to be my peace when things were too loud. I failed in different ways. But I saw you, all of you. If I gave Elise more in the will, it wasn't because I loved her more. It was because I knew what she had carried in silence, and because I knew she'd use it to hold us together, not tear us apart. Forgive me, if you can. Love. Mom. Lucas folded the letter and set it down. Clarissa wiped under her eye with the edge of her thumb. No one spoke for almost a minute. Then Lucas said, "She knew." Clarissa nodded. "Yeah." I looked down at the wood grain on the table. I didn't want to win. I just didn't want to be erased. Clarissa looked up. "You weren't. We just didn't know how to see you." There it was. Not an apology, but something close enough to hold. Lucas leaned back. "I still feel like I failed her." "You didn't," I said. "We just failed each other in different ways." Clarissa reached across the table, her hand hovering awkwardly before resting gently on mine. "Can we go through the bedroom together? I think I need to be part of it." "Yeah," I said quietly. "Let's do it together." We spent the next 3 hours in her room, sorting, folding, remembering. We laughed at a ridiculous sun hat she kept from a cruise in 1997. We cried over a baby shoe we couldn't identify. We found old receipts from Christmases we barely remembered. We didn't fix everything, but we touched the pieces, and maybe that was enough. As the sun set, Clarissa stood by the doorway and looked back at me. "I'm glad she left you the house. I wouldn't have known what to do with it." I smiled. "Neither do I. But I'll figure it out." Lucas gave me a long look before walking out. "Let us know when you're ready to spread her ashes." "I will," I said. "We'll do it right." They left. I stood in the silence of the house again. But this time, it didn't feel like mine alone. It felt shared. Not claimed, but understood. And for the first time, that was enough. I didn't sleep in the house for the first few weeks. I told myself it was the dust, or the fact that the plumbing still groaned when the heater kicked in. But the truth was simpler. I wasn't ready to hear her absence echo through the walls. Instead, I kept returning in the mornings, unlocking the door and walking in like I was still just visiting. I brewed coffee in her old tin percolator, swept the front steps, and listened to the birds peck at the feeder she'd left dangling crooked outside the kitchen window. There was peace in repetition. The small acts. Folding towels. Airing out the linen closet. Oiling the squeaky door hinges in the hallway. I didn't tell anyone how calming it felt to do chores in her space, in her wake. It made her feel close, like she had just stepped out for milk and might walk in again any second. Then came the call from the county. "Ms. Navarro." The voice was formal, clipped. "This is Patricia Quinn from Middlesex County Clerk's office. We have a property registration discrepancy regarding the main parcel in your mother's will." I sat up straighter at the kitchen table. "What kind of discrepancy?" "There's no active title filed in her name for the lot listed under Section 4B92. That land was sold 15 years ago. To a private buyer." My heart stuttered. "That can't be right. The deed's in the folder. I saw it. I'm not saying it was never hers." The woman replied, patient but firm, only that she no longer owned it at the time of her passing. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the spot on the wall where Mom's calendar used to hang. She hadn't updated her will properly. Or worse, she knew. I called Mr. Todd, who agreed to meet that afternoon. He pulled out a thick accordion file from his cabinet, flipped through documents, and exhaled. She did own the land, he confirmed. Bought it in 91. But you're right. It was sold in 2009. Why wasn't that updated, I asked. He leaned back, frowning slightly. Vivian was meticulous, but sometimes grief or shame can stall a person's paperwork. She may have kept it in the will out of guilt or regret, or she forgot entirely. I pressed my fingers to my temple. So what's left? He slid a thinner envelope across the desk. What's left is still significant. The house, the account, the rest. But Maine is off the table. I didn't care about the land itself. I cared that she had told me stories about it for years. This is where you'll plant a garden one day, she used to say. Wild, not manicured, with bees and crooked fences. You'll finally stop rushing everywhere. She had promised me peace in that imaginary plot of green. I had believed her. Now, it turned out she'd let it go quietly, never told me, and left me chasing a ghost of dirt that didn't belong to us anymore. I drove straight to the house and stood in the backyard for nearly an hour, staring at the small patch of soil behind her garden shed. I took off my shoes and stepped barefoot into the grass. It was soft, a little wet. Not Maine, not even close, but it was real. I spent the rest of the afternoon tearing out the old vegetable beds, hauling rusted garden tools to the garage, and clearing the overgrowth near the back fence. By evening, my hands were raw and blistered, but I'd made space. A week later, I went to the nursery and picked out seedlings lavender, rosemary, foxglove, and goldenrod. I bought crooked stakes and jute rope. I didn't draw a plan. I planted them in spirals, the way she used to doodle spirals when she was bored. Lucas came by the following Sunday. He walked through the gate, paused at the edge of the lawn, and took in the mess. "This is new," he said, half smiling. I wiped sweat from my forehead. "It's a fake garden, in place of a fake inheritance." He walked over, crouched next to the foxglove. "Still looks like something real to me." We sat on the grass with beers and talked about Maine, not the land, but the idea. The version she sold us in bedtime stories and Christmas letters. She always wanted to run away there, he said. After Dad died, she said it was the only place she didn't feel haunted. She never let herself go. I replied, "Maybe that's why she gave it to me, even if it was already gone." He sipped his drink. "Maybe she needed you to imagine it, because she couldn't anymore." That night, I dug out another box from the attic. This one wasn't marked. Just an old leather strap across the lid. Inside were cassette tapes, dozens of them. I found an old tape player in the coat closet, dusted it off, popped in the first cassette, and pressed play. Crackling. Then her voice. July 4th, 1994. Elise is 9. She planted a tulip bulb upside down and refused to believe it wouldn't bloom. I laughed out loud. Tape after tape, I listened to her chronicle our lives. Birthdays, school plays, sick days, little fragments she had spoken into plastic spools and hidden away. Some tapes were broken, others garbled. But through the static, I heard her trying. Over and over, trying to remember, trying to hold us, trying to speak. I cried harder for those tapes than I did at the funeral. Clarissa came the next week. She stepped into the garden like it was a chapel. "This is beautiful," she whispered. "Mom would have loved it. She never saw it," I said. Clarissa turned to me. "Then maybe she left it for you to build." We sat together, side by side, and I played her one of the tapes. A Christmas from 1997. Mom singing off key, us laughing in the background. Clarissa covered her mouth. I forgot that sound. Her laugh. I didn't. I said, "It's been stuck in my head since I was a kid." She looked at me, eyes wide with something I couldn't name. "You think we'll ever be okay?" she asked. "I think we already are," I said. "Just not in the way we thought." That night, I listened to the final tape. Her voice was thin, slower, recorded just months before she passed. If you find this, Elise, thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself. She paused. I don't know if you believe me, but I loved you. The whole time. I just didn't know how to say it out loud. The tape clicked off. I sat in the dark, the garden swaying outside the window, the silence alive with memory. And for the first time since she died, I felt something close to peace, not because she said it, but because I finally heard it. About a month after the funeral, I started sleeping at the house. It wasn't a decision so much as a slow surrender. One night, after working late in the garden, I fell asleep on the living room couch with a blanket pulled over me and the sound of summer insects ticking outside the window. When I woke up, the sun was pouring through the curtains, and I didn't feel strange. I didn't feel like a guest anymore. I made coffee and sat in her chair by the window, the one with the scratchy upholstery and the faded floral pattern, and watched the morning pass like I belonged there. That became the rhythm. Morning coffee, a few hours working remotely from her old desk, quiet lunches, a walk around the neighborhood, sorting paperwork, cooking dinner for one. At night, I'd listen to one cassette. I rationed them, one each evening, like a bedtime story for the child inside me who never got enough of her mother's attention. Clarissa and Lucas started texting more. Sometimes it was casual, a meme from Clarissa, or a blurry photo of Lucas's dog sprawled on the porch. But there were other messages, too. Clarissa sent me a voicemail once at 1:12 a.m. She didn't say anything, just breathed into the receiver for 6 seconds, then hung up. She never mentioned it. Neither did I. But I saved it. Lucas came over most Saturdays. We didn't talk about the estate anymore. Just gardened, fixed the leaky bathroom faucet, helped me clean out the crawl space. I'd forgotten how quietly competent he could be. He wasn't the baby brother anymore. He was just a man trying to find his place without a mother to orbit around. One afternoon, while we were repainting the shed, Lucas wiped sweat from his brow and said, "Do you remember that time Mom made us sleep in the basement during the blackout?" I nodded. She said it was an adventure, but she was scared. She read to us by flashlight, that weird ghost story book, the one with the drawings that gave me nightmares for weeks. He laughed. Yeah, that one. She didn't know how to be gentle. I said, but she knew how to stay. Lucas looked at me. You're a lot like her. I froze, then nodded. I know. It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't an insult. It was just a truth. One I'd resisted for years. That night, I dreamed of the house catching fire. In the dream, I ran from room to room, trying to grab things, photos, letters, tapes, but everything turned to ash in my hands. My mother stood in the garden, watching the flames, her expression unreadable. When I called out to her, she just shook her head. I woke with my heart racing. The next morning, I knew what I had to do. I called Clarissa and Lucas and asked them to come over that Sunday. No occasion, I said. Just something I want to share. They arrived in the late afternoon. I had set up a table in the backyard with lemonade, sandwiches, and a small speaker hooked up to the cassette player. They looked surprised, not uncomfortable, just unsure. What's the occasion? Clarissa asked, sitting down with her sunglasses still on. No occasion, I said. I just wanted us to listen to one last tape. Together. Lucas raised an eyebrow. The last one, I nodded. The last labeled one. Anyway, there's still a few unmarked. But this is the one she recorded 2 weeks before the hospital. They didn't argue. They didn't shift away. They just waited. I pressed play. Her voice crackled to life, older, slower, almost translucent, but still hers. If you're all here, then I must be gone. Pause. I hope you stayed close. I hope you didn't let the weight of me push you apart. Long breath. There's so much I could say, but you probably know most of it already. Elise, if you're there, thank you. For doing the hard things. For being steady even when I didn't deserve it. Clarissa, I'm sorry I leaned on your beauty and grace too often. I forgot you were allowed to fall apart. 2. Lucas, my baby. I hope you found your voice and used it. You were the best thing I ever made. All of you. You were my reason for trying, even when I didn't know how to try. Don't make a shrine out of me. Don't turn this house into a cage. Let it live. Let it breathe. Make it yours. The tape ended. We sat there, stunned. Clarissa took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were glassy, but she didn't cry. She just looked at the house. She knew. She said. She really knew everything. Lucas leaned back. She always saw more than she let on. I used to think she only loved us in parts. I said. But maybe she just didn't know how to love all at once. Clarissa nodded. Same way we only forgave her in pieces. That night, after they left. I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the closed door of my mother's bedroom. I hadn't gone inside in days. I hadn't needed to. But something was different now. I opened the door. The air smelled like dust and old perfume. I walked to the vanity, opened the top drawer, and pulled out the compact she always used. It was cracked. She never replaced it. I pressed my thumb into the powder. Still soft. Still pink. I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered, "Okay." Then I began packing the room, not to erase it, but to make space. The next morning, I called a contractor. "I want to convert the bedroom into a library," I said. The voice on the other end paused. "That's uncommon. Usually people update kitchens or add bathrooms." "I know," I said. But she had enough room for dreaming. It's my turn now. Over the next few weeks. The room changed. The floral wallpaper came down. New shelves went up. I ordered a reading chair in dark blue. Painted the walls a deep green. Books lined the space like old friends. I added a record player, a small lamp, and a new lock on the door, not to keep people out, but to remind myself it was mine. On the wall above the window, I hung a single photo, not of her, but of the garden, blooming, tangled, alive. Every night before bed, I walked in, sat in the chair, and read a few pages of something she'd never have chosen, something mine. Sometimes, I still heard her voice, not from the tapes, but from memory. She didn't say much, just a whisper now and then, a breath of approval, or a murmur of recognition. And slowly, I realized something: grief isn't always heavy. Sometimes it's a hand at your back, pushing you forward when you forget how to walk. The first time I allowed someone else into the house besides my siblings, it was for something as mundane as a plumber. The kitchen sink had been leaking for weeks, a slow but persistent drip that seemed to echo louder after midnight. I could have ignored it, the way Mom always had, stuffing towels beneath the cabinet and telling herself it wasn't a priority, but I didn't want to inherit that habit. So I called someone, and when the plumber walked through the door, toolbox in hand, I realized just how strange it felt to let a stranger into a space that still felt sacred, fragile. "This place has good bones," he said, crouched beneath the sink. "You don't see oak cabinetry like this anymore?" I nodded. "It's been in the family for decades. Looks like it's been cared for." He added, "Loved." I didn't answer. He couldn't know that care and love weren't always the same thing in this house, that sometimes silence wore the costume of affection, but I appreciated the thought anyway. After he left, I sat on the floor beside the now dry sink, hands resting on my knees. The silence didn't feel so oppressive anymore, just present. Like the house was waiting. That weekend, I hosted Clarissa and Lucas again. We didn't call it a gathering. There were no place cards or formal invites. I just sent a group message. Come by Sunday. Garden's blooming. I'll make something. Clarissa brought wine. Lucas brought chips and a strange-looking salad he said was experimental. We sat on the back patio under string lights I'd finally gotten around to hanging. The air smelled like rosemary and mulch. The garden was full of color now. Unruly and wild, in a way I think Mom would have both admired and criticized. I never thought I'd see this place like this, Clarissa said, sipping her wine. It used to feel so closed in. Lucas nodded. It was like she didn't want the world to see inside. She didn't. I said. She always said we should protect what was ours. Clarissa raised an eyebrow. Even from each other I gave a half smile. Especially from each other. We all laughed. But there was truth in it. Deep, uncomfortable truth. I served lemon pasta with garden peas and herbs from the yard. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Clarissa helped set the table. Lucas put on an old playlist from high school that made us groan and laugh in equal measure, and for a moment, it felt like we were children again. Before money, before roles, before silence became policy. As the night wore on, we wandered inside, carrying plates and glasses, laughing at Lucas's attempt to dance barefoot on the kitchen tile. When I stepped into the hallway to grab a towel, I noticed something I hadn't seen before just above the doorframe leading into the library, a faint pencil mark. I reached up and saw another. Then another vertical lines with initials scrawled beside them. E.N. 1992, C.N. 1994, L.N. 1996. Height markers. We had all grown here. Right there. In the threshold between rooms. I called them over. Look at this. Clarissa gasped. Oh my God, I forgot she used to measure us every birthday. Lucas touched one of the markings. She stopped after Dad died. The air shifted. Just slightly. Clarissa cleared her throat. She never got rid of them. No, I said. She just painted around them. We stood there for a long time, tracing faded lines like archaeologists of our own childhood. Clarissa reached for a pencil on the nearby shelf. Add another, she asked. I laughed. We're adults. So she said, let's see if you got taller from carrying all the emotional weight. Lucas snorted. I stood against the wall and let her mark it. Then Lucas. Then her. We looked ridiculous, 3 grown people measuring themselves like kids. But I had never felt closer to them. Later, after they'd gone, I made tea and stood at the edge of the hallway, staring at those lines. My line had barely moved. Still 5'6", still trying to prove something. But it wasn't about height anymore. It was about place, and I was finally claiming mine. The next morning, I woke early and opened every window in the house. The breeze rolled in like permission. I played one of Mom's tapes while I cleaned her voice, humming along with an old Billie Holiday song. I didn't cry this time. I just listened. That afternoon, I found a letter taped inside the back of her recipe book. It wasn't addressed to me. It was just titled, Mistakes. I read it twice. It was a list half confession, half memory. I should have let Elise play piano longer. I was wrong to tell her it was too expensive. I made Clarissa wear white to Dad's funeral because I thought grief needed to look pretty. I forgot Lucas's science fair. I told him it was rescheduled. It wasn't. I didn't want to be the only adult in the house. I think I resented them for needing me. It wasn't an apology, but it was honest. I copied the list into my journal and wrote next to each line I know. I remember. I forgive you. Some days were harder than others. There were mornings I woke up and thought I heard her in the kitchen. Afternoons I'd reach for the phone to tell her something before remembering. Nights when the garden felt too quiet and I wished I could ask her how she managed to survive Dad's death with 3 small children and 1,000 unpaid bills. But the hardest days were the ones where I didn't think of her at all, because that felt like betrayal, until I realized something else. Maybe forgetting, even for a little while, was part of healing, not erasing, just loosening the grip. I started inviting people over more, a friend from work, a neighbor who brought zucchini bread and stayed to help me repaint the porch swing. The house breathed easier with new voices in it. One Sunday, Clarissa arrived unannounced. She brought an old jewelry box she had found in storage. "It's hers," she said. "I think you should have it." Inside were brooches, broken earrings, a watch that had stopped ticking in 2003. But beneath the velvet lining was something else, a key. A small brass key with a label Hope Chest, attic. We both stared at it. Clarissa whispered. She always said she didn't have one. I stood up. She lied. We climbed into the attic, dust swirling in beams of light. Lucas arrived 15 minutes later with pizza and beer after Clarissa texted him with no context. Together. The three of us opened the chest. Inside were things we hadn't seen in years. Mom's wedding dress, our baby shoes, a faded boarding pass to Paris dated 1987, a photograph of her and Dad at a county fair, young and sunburned and wildly in love. At the very bottom, another letter. For someday. If you found this, then maybe I wasn't as good at hiding things as I thought. Or maybe you were just determined enough to keep digging. Either way, thank you. Love isn't tidy. It's layered, uncomfortable, but it's the only thing I ever truly wanted to leave behind. Don't make me into a saint. I was not that, but I was trying. Every day. Keep the chest. Fill it with your own mistakes. And when someone finds it after you're gone, let them forgive you, too. We didn't speak. We just sat there, hands resting on the edge of the chest, surrounded by the clutter of her love. And somehow, in that dust-filled attic, it all felt clean. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in Mom's now my bedroom, staring at the ceiling fan spinning in slow circles, listening to the low groan of the old pipes, the wind brushing against the ivy outside. I had lived 35 years thinking the past was static, a dried flower pressed into a memory book, brittle and unchanging. But it wasn't. It moved when you touched it. It shifted when you dared to look. I got up sometime around 3 a.m. and went to the attic alone. The hope chest was still open from earlier, its contents scattered like we had been too afraid to close the lid. I didn't organize it. I just sat cross-legged in front of it and picked up the photograph of Mom and Dad again, their heads tilted toward each other, the fairground Ferris wheel behind them like a halo. She looked young. Not just younger, but freer. There was something reckless in her smile that I had never known, and in his eyes something soft, adoring, full of the kind of ease I'd never witnessed in real life. It was strange to think they had once laughed like that they had danced barefoot in the kitchen or stayed up late watching bad movies, that they had once whispered dreams about children and gardens and Maine. By the time the sun started spilling pale light into the attic, I was still sitting there, still holding that photo. But something had shifted. The next week, I started donating things. Not everything. I kept what mattered, but the rest, the extra blankets, the unused glassware, the coats from the 80s, went to a local women's shelter. I didn't tell Clarissa or Lucas beforehand. I just did it. I knew they'd understand. I even called the Historical Society to offer some of Mom's church records, recipes, and handwritten notes from her years volunteering. They were thrilled. Vivienne Navarro, the woman on the phone, said, "She was the one who rewrote all our fundraiser manuals in the 90s. We still use her gingerbread booth instructions." I smiled. That sounds like her. You know, she added. People like your mother, they live on in more ways than just memory. They leave fingerprints all over the town. I didn't say it then, but I realized that was exactly what she'd done in this house. Not just in the walls, or the furniture, or the attic chest, but in us. One evening, after another long day of cleaning and cataloging, I walked into the library, my library now, and took down one of her old books. It was a faded novel, pages underlined in blue ink. Inside the cover, I found another surprise, a pressed flower, still clinging to color. There was no note, just that single bloom, flattened and dry, as if she'd hidden something beautiful away just to prove it could survive. And somehow, it did. I placed it between two glass frames and set it on the shelf beside the tapes. The next day, I got a letter in the mail. Official envelope. No return address. When I opened it, my heart thudded. It was from the Maine County Registrar. Parcel 4B92 owner James E. Benson, status vacant since 2022, tax delinquent. Available for private purchase. Attached was a brief note. We reviewed your mother's former ownership. While she did sell the parcel in 2009, the property is now inactive. If you're interested in reacquisition, please contact the county office. I stared at the paper, barely breathing. I didn't even know if I wanted it anymore. But the idea of that garden, her voice calling it mine, imagining me there, planting wild things in crooked rows, rose up again like a song I hadn't heard in years. I called. It took a few weeks, a few forms, a surprising amount of paperwork. But it happened. The land was mine. When I told Lucas and Clarissa, they looked stunned. You bought it back? Lucas asked. I nodded. It felt like finishing a sentence she never completed. Clarissa hugged me tighter than she ever had before. What are you going to do with it? I don't know yet, I said. Maybe just sit there. Maybe plant something and watch it die. Or grow. A month later, I drove to Maine. The land was smaller than I'd pictured. Rockier. Surrounded by pine trees and silence. There was no house, just a clearing and a few birds darting between low branches. But it was perfect. I walked the boundary, touching bark, collecting fallen pine cones, feeling the earth beneath my shoes like it could tell stories if I stood still long enough. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I took out a small cloth pouch from my coat pocket. Inside were ashes. Just a pinch. I hadn't spread all of her. Some of Mom's remains had gone into the river where she used to walk with Dad. Another portion beneath the lavender bush in the backyard. But this part was for the place she had promised. I crouched by a mossy rock and opened the pouch, letting the wind do the rest. The ashes lifted into the trees, scattered among the needles, disappearing into the quiet. I whispered one word, home, and the wind answered not with a voice, but with rustling, soft and real. I sat there for a while. Then I took a notebook out of my backpack and began to write. Not about her, about me, about the garden, the tapes, the attic, the way grief had become not a wound, but a weather pattern, something you brace for. Something that eventually passes, leaving the air changed. The following spring, I planted a single tree on that land, a sugar maple. Not for her, for us. Back at the house, things continued shifting. Neighbors started waving more. A kid from down the street asked if she could pick flowers from the fence line. I let her. Clarissa started hosting family dinners again, this time without the pretense, without the performance. Lucas adopted another dog, named him Harvey, after one of Dad's old stories. We started leaving the tapes out during gatherings. People could play one at random. It became a ritual, like opening a door to the past and letting it walk through the room. One afternoon, I caught a cousin crying in the library, holding a tape to her chest. She always called me her storm cloud, she said, laughing through tears. I thought she meant it as an insult. She didn't. I replied. She just didn't know how to say you made her feel something. That was the thing with Mom. She never said it outright. But she left it everywhere. In pencil marks and cassette tapes. In dusty flower presses and hidden letters. In the rooms she didn't let us redecorate. And the recipes she never wrote down but somehow expected us to remember. Her love wasn't loud. It was coded. Fragmented. But it was there. And I had spent a lifetime learning to read her language. Now I could finally speak it. Not fluently, but enough. The summer after reclaiming the mainland passed in slow chapters. I traveled back and forth some weekends in the house, some up north with muddy boots and a trowel, planting whatever would take in the rocky soil. It wasn't a garden yet. Not really. Just rows of defiant green surrounded by pine and wind and silence. But even the silence felt different there. Less like absence, more like space. At the house, change came gradually. I refinished the hardwood floors, repainted the front door navy blue, replaced the mailbox. These weren't grand renovations. They were acknowledgments. Each act a conversation with the woman who used to live here. One afternoon, while organizing the linen closet, I found a silk scarf tucked behind the towels. It was green with gold edges, something I'd never seen her wear. It still smelled faintly of her. I didn't cry. I wrapped it around my neck and wore it to the store. No one noticed, but I felt like I was carrying a piece of her, just lightly, like a folded secret. The truth is, I never wanted the house. Not really. I wanted what it represented: proof that I had been seen, that I had mattered, that she hadn't spent her final days believing Clarissa was the angel and Lucas the heart, while I remained the storm, the stone, the reliable thing no one ever praised out loud. But I was learning to love the house for itself now, not as evidence, not as inheritance, just as a place where things began and ended and began again. That fall, I hosted Thanksgiving. It was the first time in a decade that the family didn't gather at Clarissa's. She offered. Of course her dining room was larger. Her plates matched, but she didn't push when I said, "Let me do it this year." I spent the week preparing, polished the silver Mom had insisted on keeping even though we never used it, dug out her recipe cards and made her stuffing exactly as written, including the part where she circled no raisins in red ink like it was a commandment. I even used her cracked gravy boat, setting it proudly in the center of the table like a relic. Lucas came early to help. Clarissa arrived an hour late, looking flustered but holding 2 pies and a bottle of wine. We didn't talk about the missing members. Some cousins couldn't make it. Some stayed away because of old wounds, old wills. That was okay. We had enough. Dinner was loud. Laughter ricocheted through the hallway. Someone spilled cranberry sauce. The smoke alarm went off when I forgot the rolls in the oven. It was messy and uneven and warm. Halfway through dessert, Clarissa raised her glass and said, "To Mom." Everyone stilled. To Vivienne. She continued, "For doing her best, for raising us even when she didn't know how, and for giving us this house, this weird little collection of mismatched chairs and old ghosts and wildflowers." I raised my glass. "And for finally teaching us how to speak the truth, even if it took her dying to get us to listen," Lucas added. "And for Elise, who held it all when no one else could." There was a pause, then a soft clink of glasses. After everyone left and the dishes were stacked in crooked towers beside the sink, I stood in the garden with a coat over my shoulders and a mug of tea warming my hands. The wind rustled the lavender. The string lights flickered softly overhead. Clarissa joined me. She didn't say anything right away, just stood beside me. Quiet. Then I still don't know how to be a sister, she said. I didn't know how to be a daughter for a long time. I replied. We're learning. She nodded. You think she knew this would happen? Us like this? I don't know, I said, but she left just enough pieces behind for us to build something. Clarissa smiled, a little crooked, but standing. She turned to go, then paused. You're good at this. All of it. The house, the garden, the holding. I shrugged. I had practice. And then I was alone again. But it didn't feel like it used to. There was something sacred in solitude now. Something earned. Later that week, I wrote a letter to myself. Not a journal entry. A letter. Elise, you did it. You stayed when it was hard. You didn't run from the quiet or the past or the parts of her that lived in you. You learned her language. You broke the silence. You were seen. Maybe not always. Maybe not in the ways you needed back then. But in the end, she chose you. And now, you're choosing yourself. Keep the house. Keep the garden. Keep the ache it makes things grow. And when the day comes that someone finds the letters you leave behind, let them know you loved, imperfectly, but truly. I folded the letter and placed it inside the hope chest, not to be read now, but one day, maybe by a niece, maybe by a stranger, maybe by no one. It didn't matter. It was enough to write it. A few weeks later, I drove back to Maine to check on the maple tree. It was still standing, still small, but holding its own against the wind. I knelt beside it, pressed my fingers into the cold soil, and whispered, I see you. It wasn't about the tree. Not really. It was about everything I had buried and everything I had dared to grow anyway. I took one last look around the clearing, then walked back to the car, the wind brushing against my scarf. Her scarf. In the rearview mirror, the tree disappeared behind the curve of the road, but I didn't feel like I was leaving her behind anymore. I felt like I was carrying her forward, lightly, carefully, like a pressed flower between the pages of a story that was still being written.